On April 1, 2026, 4 astronauts strapped into a capsule at Kennedy Space Center and fired a rocket that sent them around the moon. It was a flawless launch and the culmination of an 81-year path. But to understand why this mission happened and why it took over half a century to go back, we have to rewind past NASA to a secret military facility on the Baltic coast of Germany. Here, Wernher von Braun directed the creation of the V2. Standing 46 feet tall and flying over 3,500 miles per hour, it was the world's first ballistic missile. It was also the first man-made object to reach space, built specifically to drop 2,200-pound warheads on targets hundreds of miles away in London, Paris, and Antwerp. The V2 was constructed using slave labor. Deep inside the Mittelwerk underground factory, more than 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died producing these missiles. That death toll outnumbers the people the rocket actually killed in combat. Von Braun personally visited this factory and recruited prisoners from Buchenwald to work in it. By late 1944, Germany was losing the war. Von Braun made a strict calculation. He chose to surrender to the Americans rather than the Soviets. In May 1945, he walked toward American lines, his arm in a cast, offering his technical documents and engineering team to the United States. The Americans took the deal. Knowing exactly what he had done, the United States absorbed him and 1,600 scientists. The ethical atrocities committed at Mittelwerk were deliberately buried or minimized, all because the U.S. government decided it absolutely could not let the Soviets have that rocket technology. This absorption was called Operation Paperclip. Settling at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, von Braun's team developed ballistic missiles for the U.S. Army. Meanwhile, von Braun built a new public persona. He appeared on Disney television specials and wrote magazine articles. The architect of the V2 was successfully rehabilitated into the smiling, forward-looking face of America's space ambitions. Then, in October 1957, the Soviets put a metal sphere the size of a beach ball into orbit. Sputnik did little more than transmit a simple radio signal, but the resulting panic in Washington was immediate and profound. The logic was clear. If the Soviets could put a satellite into orbit, they could put a nuclear warhead there too. NASA was created the following year, specifically to counter that threat. The Soviets struck again in April 1961, sending Yuri Gagarin on a 108-minute orbit around the Earth. 3 weeks later, America managed a 15-minute suborbital flight with Alan Shepard. When Shepard was pulled from the ocean, the United States was firmly in second place. 1 month after Shepard's flight, President Kennedy stood before Congress and committed the nation to landing a human on the moon before the end of the decade. At that moment, NASA had no plan, no rocket capable of the trip, and the necessary technology had not even been invented. What followed was 8 years of extreme engineering. Project Mercury proved humans could survive the environment of space. Then, Project Gemini ran 10 crewed missions in 2 years, figuring out spacewalks, orbital rendezvous, docking, and precision re-entry. Over a few short years, NASA effectively learned how to operate in the vacuum. None of this followed standard engineering protocols. Driven by intense political pressure and the terror of falling behind a hostile superpower, the United States poured massive resources into a high-risk timeline that forced aerospace technology to evolve decades faster than it otherwise would have. That rushed timeline came with a severe cost. On January 27, 1967, during a ground test on the launch pad, a fire swept through the Apollo 1 command module. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee died without ever leaving the ground. The tragedy halted the entire program for 21 months while the spacecraft was redesigned. When NASA returned to the pad, they moved fast. In December 1968, Apollo 8 made Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders the first humans to leave Earth's gravitational influence. Orbiting the moon, Anders captured Earthrise, showing a small, fragile planet hanging in the void. 7 months later, on July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot in the Sea of Tranquility. Roughly 600 million people, a third of the human population at the time, watched it happen live. The Saturn V rocket that carried them there was designed by Wernher von Braun. NASA completed 6 lunar landings in total. They improvised a remarkable rescue when an oxygen tank exploded on Apollo 13, bringing that crew home alive. But in December 1972, Eugene Cernan stepped back into his lunar module, stating, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return." They didn't return. This chart shows the trajectory of human spaceflight altitude over time. After Apollo peaked at nearly 240,000 miles from Earth, the line completely flatlines. For more than 50 years, no human traveled further than about 250 miles up, firmly stuck in low Earth orbit. That low Earth orbit era was defined by the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. They delivered massive scientific value and established a continuous human presence in space. But the shuttle program also suffered devastating losses, with the crews of Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003 killed during flight. After mastering the sheer logistical impossibility of reaching another world, humanity simply stopped. The geopolitical race had been won. Without Cold War tension driving the budget, the costs of deep space exploration were deemed too high. That calculus finally shifted in 2017. NASA established the Artemis program with a specific new objective: return to the moon, but this time build a sustained human presence to serve as a stepping stone to Mars. The hardware was tested in November 2022 with Artemis I. The massive new Space Launch System fired an uncrewed Orion capsule around the moon and back. The rocket performed precisely as intended, but upon re-entry, engineers discovered an unexpected problem. Parts of Orion's heat shield had eroded away. This anomaly took years to analyze and sparked intense internal debate at NASA over the calculated risk of putting humans on the next flight before a complete redesign. Ultimately, they made the decision to fly. On April 1, 2026, Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen launched on Artemis II. They manually piloted the Orion spacecraft, tested its life support systems, and flew on a free return trajectory that carried them further from Earth than the Apollo 13 crew. 10 days later, they splashed down safely off the coast of San Diego, clearing the path for the first crewed lunar landing of the Artemis program, targeted for no earlier than 2028. The road from the Baltic coast of Germany to a capsule splashing down in the Pacific spans 81 years. It encompasses two superpowers, the ashes of a world war, 6 lunar landings, and a half-century gap. Now, a generation largely born after the last footprint was left in the lunar dust has decided to shoulder the risk once again. Eugene Cernan promised we would return. We finally are.